Alright, I thought I'd give my thoughts and impressions on the new Fire Emblem Three Houses trailer. So that's what we're going to do here.
Long ago, the divine Ceros received a revelation from the goddess, a gift to help guide the lost. Now,
Okay, let's go back to the map. So, right off the bat, we can tell that this is going to have much better world building than Fates, simply because we have a map, and even smaller areas like these even have names. I also want to talk about these three crests here. Throughout the trailer, we get a look at the three different characters. They seem to be represented by red, blue, and yellow. The first and one of the more obvious things that I want to point out is that this yellow crest, it has a crescent on it, and the crescent is usually a symbol for Islam, and also, which is very heavily associated with the Middle East. And the character in yellow, who we'll see later, his name is Claude. He's also very tan. So I think that it's very possible that this area will be based on a sort of more deserty region, which will be an interesting change of setting for some of the game. I also noticed on certain characters there seems to be a more Celtic aesthetic. I'll point it out later when I see it so that you can see it for yourself. And I think that might be with the blue side, and I'll say why later on. And this crest, it has a two-headed eagle, which is typically associated with the Holy Roman Empire, I believe, as it was considered the second Rome, so it had two eagles. Or a two-headed eagle, rather. So, if all this is true, they're really using a lot of references from actual history for this game, which I think is very interesting and gets me excited. As you can tell already, I'm a big nerd about history, so that's all very exciting to me. And it sort of makes the world feel a bit more real, which I'm excited for. And the red character, her name is Edelgard, that's what it is, which most people misread as Edgelord the first time. And I'm not going to bother trying to pronounce these, they're hard enough to read as is with the font, but I do think that that's going to be a more traditional sort of knights and medieval aesthetic, like a typical medieval European aesthetic that Fire Emblem is typically known for. I also want to point out this sword. Some people, I believe, I think it may have been in Mecha's analysis of the trailer, he said that this sword may be similar to the Levin sword because of the design. However, I don't think that's accurate because there are swords like this in history, and I believe they are Middle Eastern as well. So it could have something to do with the yellow house. That's just speculation though right now, but these are actual swords, and I wanted to just point that out. That is a normal design for a sword. Also, with that little cut of... we'll see it again in a minute. So this sort of animation style is very reminiscent of what we see in Echoes. Yeah, that's perfect, actually. So it's very likely that the animations are going to be done by that side, which is both good and bad, I think, because the ones in Awakening and Fates, I think, looked better than them. However, that may have just been an issue with Echoes being on the 3DS and it not being able to properly handle the animations for these scenes, because it was very choppy in that. So they might be much more smooth on the Switch. So this character seems to be a similar entity to either Naga or Milla, just based off design and also like these dragon-like wings on this tiara that she's wearing. And given the fact that she's doing the narration, which I'll go back and we'll listen to the narration again later, I just want to get through the whole trailer first. But given by that, she may be a deity or some kind of oracle-like character. So, okay. Let's go back just a smidge. Yeah. So with this whole attire, it looks a bit Celtic to me. My reasons for that are the fur, also this sort of so almost plaid aesthetic that they have on this cape. That is very Celtic in design. Also, this looks like a sort of knot design, which is very common in Celtic culture. So I do think that one of the factions, the blue one, given that this is wearing blue, is going to be a Celtic sort of design, which I think is very interesting because we've, for all of Fire Emblem except Fates with Hoshido, it's always been medieval Europe, but they seem to be branching out in this, which I'm glad, because we really need a change of setting, I think. Okay, so right away everyone's thinking this looks like Radiant Dawn, which makes sense. It's the first game on console in a long time. I think it's been 10 years, actually. I could be wrong, though. But one thing I want to point out in just a second, I think. Right here. You see these lines that sort of come out from the various enemies? I think that that might be a line of sight or who they're targeting. It's hard to tell, but the idea of a line of sight gets me excited, so that's what I want it to be. Because that would be much better than a Fog of War system, I think. Because, well, one idea I have for this is if someone was standing on the other side of this thick forest, you wouldn't be able to have a line of sight on them, and therefore they wouldn't appear on the map. However, that's just me being optimistic. It very likely is just who they're targeting, but it's obviously here for some reason. And we see one on this one as well, so it's hard to tell exactly what this is. I think what it is, though, is all these characters, the character being selected has a line of sight on, and this one may have a line of sight on someone who's over here. Possibly this one. It's hard to tell.
Go ahead, give me yours.
Okay. Just a smidge. So here we have the option wheel for when you are standing next to an enemy, at least. So there's attack and magic, which have been separated, which means magic might not be based on tomes, since this character, as far as we know, can only use axes and swords. So magic might be something the characters learn themselves, more similar to what they had in Echoes, where as the characters leveled up, they would be able to use more spells. That's an interesting idea, and I think it could be very interesting giving more characters unique roles, because often if two characters are the same class, one of them typically is just the better of the two. Or they just default to one is stronger and the other is faster. And I think that if they do that with the magic, it could solve some of those problems by giving one character perhaps more utility than the other, but perhaps the other one has better stats. Next we have combat arts. These are most likely going to be similar to what we had in Echoes as well, with the arts. There's no knowing if magic or arts will take HP, at least I see no indication of it at any point in the trailer. So they could be linked to weapons, or they could be linked to the characters themselves. That's something we don't really know. Next is formation, which we'll go over later in the trailer, because I think we see it demonstrated. If it isn't being demonstrated there, though, I think formation could potentially be something like reposition, drawback, shove, etc. It could be something like that, which I would like, but I don't think it would make as much sense, and I'll explain why in just a minute. And then we have equip and items as two separate things, which I really don't know what the difference is. It might be equip is for your weapons, and items is just for things like vulneraries and perhaps stat boosters like Draco Shields. Because in Radiant Dawn, you were able to carry 4 weapons and 4 items at the same time, so that might be why this split exists. And then there's weight. Here we can see that durability is back in the game. We also see the name of this class, which is Aristocrat, which is most likely just another word for Lord in this context, but her class can use swords and axes. So we see later that one of the Lords uses lances, and the other one uses a bow. So they might also be aristocrats, or one's a lord and one's some other sort of regal sounding name. just because they like to do that with the main lords, giving them their own sort of class, like we see in FE7, where Eliwood, Lyn, and Hector are all lords. The three main characters in this might all be aristocrats, and then they might promote into different promotions, such as how Eliwood becomes a Night Lord, Hector becomes a Great Lord, and Lyn becomes a Blade Lord. Next we have a few new things here. Well, first there's the normal attack, hit, crit. This seems to be attack speed, which if this is here and it's 0, she most certainly doesn't have 0 speed. So either there is a con system and Steel Axe is just weighing her down to 0 speed, or there is no con system, but the weapons have weight and that is just subtracted from your speed. If that's the case, it's more similar to Genealogy of the Holy War. And if there's a con system, it's going to be more similar to a Tellius game. Next is a Void, which we all know. Next we have END RSL. I think Mecha said it in his trailer that someone who knew Japanese and saw the Japanese trailer said that these might stand for Endurance and Resilience, which might mean Defense and Res. And then we have range. I do not know for sure either of these though. And now we have the sort of battle forecast. And some people don't think the weapon triangle is in this. I disagree though, because the hit rate is quite low here. And so an axe most likely has, in most games, around like 70 or 65 hit, and this character probably does not have like 0 skill. They are an axe class and they typically have lower skill, but they're also a lord which typically has some of the highest skill. So that would boost her hit quite a bit, and she does have some crit, which would imply she has some skill as well. So if the weapon triangle wasn't the case, then hit rate, if there is no weapon triangle, hit rates for weapons in this game is very low. If there is a weapon triangle, though, that would explain why the hit rate is so shaky. We also see the name of this enemy here. Now, some people think that this is a potentially playable character named Mercedes. I'm not sure, though. This might just be a generic portrait, and that the enemy castle or force is called Mercedes. Because in things like Genealogy, when you hover over an enemy, they're often just called whatever that castle is. So it's hard to tell, but that's what I'm leaning more towards. So here we get to see a whole group of people running with the playable character here, or the player character. I guess playable, whatever. So throughout all of Fire Emblem, there's been this abstraction that there's more than just the 14 characters or however many you bring to the map, that there's actually an army behind it. It's not just supposed to be interpreted as 14 kids go off, defeat an entire army, and slay a dragon. There's often other actual soldiers there, but it's just an abstraction because of the limitations of the game. And that makes sense, because it would be terrible if you had to command like 100 units. So I like that this is a touch added. It really makes it feel more realistic, which I like a lot. So here we see Dimitri, one of the other lords, who, judging by the blue, I'm thinking that he's probably going to be related to the Celtic side. I don't know for sure yet, though. That's just me thinking. And we see that he uses a lance here. Nothing else really that I've noticed here. And here we have Claude the Archer. And again, nothing really new that I've noted here so far. I have, I guess one thing that I noticed later on, when they shoot, there's sort of like a purple glow to the arrows. I'll point that out again when I see it. That might be just him using an art, or maybe you can have like some sort of magical arrow, or maybe these are even magic, who knows. They might just be special effects though. Such a brutal, irrational world we live in. Some believe crests. And there was sort of the Celtic pattern on those guys' shorts again. I love this view. I used to play a lot of Total War games, and this just reminds me of it so much, and it looks so nice to me. It looks like a proper actual formation that you would see an army in, and I like that quite a bit. We also see two more characters that you'll have. This one we'll go into more later. His name is Billith, or Billith, which I think someone pointed out is a name of like the Lord of Demons or something. Which when I heard that, I immediately thought kind of like Robin and Grima, because it is very heavily implied that this is going to be an Avatar character. There's no confirmation on that, but if it is, and if he is somehow a Lord of Demons or whatever, that would be very similar to Grima. I don't know any of that though. That's just me making some connection that's probably baseless. And then we see another guy who looks very grumpy here. He's got the emo haircut. Oh yes, we also see this map sort of mini-map change when you go into this mode. And one thing to note, when you click on Billith, you'll see sort of the path he'll take when you select him to attack an enemy. And you'll see that. Yep. Again, this character's name is Hilda, which could be the Force, but they might also be a playable character. Hard to tell. Again, don't really know. Oh, also, I should have noticed this before. This might be an indicator of the skills that a character has. This looks a lot like the symbol for Wrath we see a lot. And on Edelgard, we see the sort of symbol for Vantage. So that's something worth noting, that you might be able to easily see skills listed here. And you might see enemy skills here, which would be a nice little quality of life change.
Crests are to blame.
Music is very good. Oh yeah, so here we see them sort of running around in what seems to be like a My Castle to me. There might be other areas you can explore. But what I do think might be worth noting is, if it is like a My Castle, then you probably come back to the same castle over and over, because there's hopefully no pocket dimension stuff like in Fates. And obviously they're not going to build a castle wherever they are. Perhaps they go to different castles, and I'm hoping it's functionally very similar to what the My Castle thing was in Fates, because functionally it was a fun little system, but in sort of it just conflicted so heavily with how the story was going that it just didn't make sense. So you may be returning to the same castle a lot. That would save time for IS, that way they wouldn't have to model dozens of different locations to go and explore around. But there's no real knowing that yet. And the fact that you are controlling Billith here implies that he is going to be sort of the tactician, as you always play the tactician in Fire Emblem. And there's a little bit more hinting at that as we go on. So I'm kind of expecting him to be an avatar. It makes sense. And I'm not a fan of the Avatar, but it seems like the Three Lords are going to be the main focus, and he'll be more like Robin, where he's not really as integral to the story. So right here, again, this just reinforces the idea that you will be playing as this character, because you're making the choice for what she's doing. And this could be like a little barracks activity, which raises one of her weapon skills, or ranks. And they also refer to you as teacher a lot, which again signifies to me that this is going to be an avatar, because otherwise they might call you by name, but by saying teacher they might be able to actually voice act it, because they obviously would just have to cut out every time they would say the avatar's name. But instead they could just say teacher, which again implies that he's sort of the tactician leading like what is done. Which I like a lot, because it really makes sense from a game design standpoint, because you as a player are dictating everyone's actions. And this sort of self-insert is a good way of representing that, even if it sometimes detracts from the story. But if you're given a smaller role in the story, then it doesn't matter as much. So again, we get a look at this character. She seems to be the same as from before, judging by the tiara with little dragon wings on it. I think we also saw the flower on her head before. And this relic she appears to be holding, if I had to guess, it would be something sort of like the sealed falchion that you see in Echoes at one point when it's in Milla. But there's no real telling. It doesn't really look like a sword too much. Perhaps like the hilt is up here and this is like the blade and it's decayed over time or something, and some magical bullshit will get it back to normal and you'll use it to slay the final dragon boss because it's going to be a dragon like always. At least that's what I'm expecting, because there's sort of like the scaly design on her, the dragon wings. There's obviously a dragon somewhere, and they refer to a dragon on the sort of painting that was earlier on in the trailer. So obviously this is going to be something of importance. It could be the Fire Emblem, but I think the Fire Emblem might be one of the crests they referred to at one point, or perhaps all the crests together are the Fire Emblems. That's, again, just sort of baseless speculation, but I'm excited and my mind's jumping all over the place, so I wanted to just spit it out here in case I'm right, and then later I can go back and say, yeah, I called it. So here we see what I assume is the formation type of thing, which I'm very hyped for, because the inclusion of something like this, like a triangle formation, perhaps like a phalanx, shield wall formation, these could be really interesting ways to change up the gameplay a bit and make you have to think a little bit more. By giving the player more options, you'll be able to come up with different strategies and ways to approach problems, which is always good for these types of games that involve all the strategizing. So we see them form this sort of triangle formation. Triangle formations are usually used to sort of like, they're usually like a charge maneuver to sort of get deeper into enemy lines upon the charge. Mostly for cavalry, not too often with actual foot soldiers, but it should function the same. So I would guess that this probably has a player phase bonus, but that's again just my guess. Nothing more. These guys fly up comically, it's pretty funny. So this is probably another playable character, because this looks like a generic. So that's probably another one of the characters we'll have access to playing as. And they appear to be a mage, you know, obviously by the fireballs and such. I think Mecha noted this, that she's sort of on like higher terrain. This might just be the map, or, you know, just so it's not entirely flat the whole way through. But if there is terrain, that's going to be fun to play around and could offer some good strategic moments in the game. So I hope it is terrain, because that's always fun. So here we have Menacing Man, obviously a very antagonistic looking dude, and this looks like it's similar to the thing that I said might be like the Falchion or Fire Emblem before, that the goddess or oracle or whatever was holding. Just judging by, like, it sort of looks like this decayed bone-like design almost. Like, this looks kind of like a spinal cord to me. And it's sort of like a magical whip thing. I also wanted to note, he, I think, might be the Celtic side, just because there's this little bit of, like, war paint look on him, which is a bit more common with the Celtic societies. And he's also, he's not tan like Claude is, so he's most likely not from the Arabic side. So he's most likely either the Celtic side or the typical medieval European side. And he's also got like this very obviously sort of evil looking attire, big black spikes, chains. Just see the animation. So here we have these sort of things which they might be like a training dummy, although now that I'm seeing these guys look like they have red clothing on over here, so then this might be an actual map. And it does look like a very menacing place, church-like even, with the arches perhaps. And we'll go into sort of church stuff later, because they in a fact sheet, I believe, they reference how the church is a very powerful force in this, which is reminiscent of medieval Europe, how the Catholic Church was very much in control of it, like the Pope had as much power, if not more, than many kings. But anyway, let's talk about the elephant in this room. Quite literally, actually bigger than an elephant, it looks like. No idea if these are mechanical, if this is some sort of crazy steampunk thing, or if this is like a powered by magic or whatever. They're reminiscent of sort of like the Faceless and Risen from Awakening and Fates. And we see Claude shoot here with his guys, and as you see, like again, these arrows have like a purple glow to them, so this perhaps is either a magic or a combat art being used. Not sure, it could just be special effects on it so you can see the arrows better. Also, I just wanted to say, a lot of people are complaining that it looks like Claude's model is whitewashed, which it is a shame because there isn't much color representation in Fire Emblem, but I don't think IS intentionally whitewashed him. I think what most likely happened was they made a generic model for every single class and then plop each character's head on the model, because that would save a lot of development time. And it would also make reclassing much easier if that is in the game. And if Claude's head was plopped on a body with white skin and his head was the proper tan color, it would clash very obviously and it wouldn't look very good. That's not really an excuse for making his model look white, but the character is still looking like he's going to be Middle Eastern based to me, which is good. And now we see the sort of critical animation. We don't hear, we don't hear a crit quote, we just hear what sounds like Edelgard speaking. So I don't know if the player character is going to have crit quotes, because they're most certainly not getting rid of those. Or they perhaps just chose not to show them in the trailer. There might also be multiple voices you can pick for the avatar, and they don't want to have sort of a set voice in mind for players before they play the game, because then it might imply that that voice is the canon voice for the avatar. Or they just wanted to have the voiceover play instead of this, but I don't notice any lip movement on him, so I don't really know. Maybe the avatar just doesn't have crit quotes. And now this character seems to be like a Tiki or a Fae or a Mer for the game. Most likely a Manakee you get, and that's about all I can say. She seems to fit the general archetype for the character. What's really nice is, unlike Naui, she appears to have clothes, which is appreciated.
I will return here someday, my teacher. Promise me that you won't forget me.
And then they did delay the game to spring 2019, as you can see. Honestly, I'm fine with that because Smash is coming out, so that'll hold me over quite nicely. But for other people who are going to be, there's a lot of people who are going to be bummed out that it was delayed, and it is a shame. It sucks that they said it's going to be out by 2018 and it's not. That's bad on them. But I'm also glad that they push it back because it does give them more time to work on it rather than rushing it out. And once the game's out, if the initial build of the game is buggy, it gets shitty reviews, and everyone hears that, and less people give it a chance. But if you take the time to patch all that out and iron it out, when it's finally released, we all have a good game that doesn't need any patches, and it starts off with a good impression, and then we have a good game to play for the rest of time, rather than a buggy mess that initially comes out that no one gives it a chance afterwards, even after it gets patched, because the initial reception is so bad. So, you know, it sucks that it's delayed, but it's also most likely it's better this way. That way it's finished. And that's about it for the trailer. We also got this fact sheet. This I got from one of the Reddits. You should find it really easily. So the things to note is the game, the continent. We already have a name for the continent. We have a name for this continent before we have a name for the Fates continent, as far as I'm aware, which is pretty impressive. So on this continent, the Church of Syros exercises great power over the land and its people. So again, this is the idea of the church being powerful, and perhaps the church will be somewhat corrupt or something. I imagine it'll probably be used to create sort of the gray morality that Fire Emblem is known for. And as the main character, the player must not only fight on the battlefield, but also can move the character freely and interact with the other characters to build relationship and gather information at some point. So again, it sounds like the avatar is going to be Billith, judging by everything so far. Yeah. And again, your protagonist meets the three characters, Edelgard, Dimitri, and Claude. So, yeah, this guy, Billith, does seem to be an avatar. I would have rathered him be his own character, but it just makes a lot of sense from a game design standpoint. So I can't really blame them for it, and it is fun to create a customizable character. So, just so long as I have a very minor role in the story, I'll be happy. If not, I'll be disappointed. But overall, I just want to give my overall thoughts on this trailer, and I am so amazed that in this trailer, we do not have tits and ass shoved in our face like we had for Fates with Camilla in the initial trailer. I'm so amazed because I was expecting IS to take some of the reception from Fates and improve the story and the dialogue and all the other aspects of the writing department of the game, because they do genuinely want to appease their fans. I even wrote a whole thing back in March on this, that I was expecting the new FE to be a little bit less like Fates and Awakening, and a little bit more sort of what we expect from the classic thing, which I called, but I didn't actually think it would be this true to it. I thought they'd have some amount of the fan service in, but throughout this whole trailer, we really don't see that. Instead,
received a revelation from the goddess, a gift to help guide the lost.
Instead, we get brilliant narration, an already impressively designed world with all these named locations. Are these names of rivers? Are they names of towns? Because we have dozens of them all over the map. There's already the world's looking like it's so fully realized, and it's presenting itself in a very Game of Thrones-esque vibe to me, which I'm so stricken by, because I was not expecting it to go this extreme in terms of appealing to more toward the classic fans, because I would have thought IS would have wanted to appeal more all-encompassing to their fan base, at least attempt to, and what my expectations would be that they fail. But instead, they're just going fully into a very keeping sort of their artistic integrity with this, and I'm really happy with it. At least that's what it appears so far. And I don't see how they would undermine that so much, because if you wanted to show that there's going to be fan service in this game, you show that, because throwing tits and ass in your trailer is going to draw in more money and more people. But instead we don't get that, which, if that's not in the main trailer, I don't know if that's going to be in the game, because you're going to get more people interested in it if there is a big booby MILF in the trailer. I'm so glad they didn't, and it really just implies to me that it's not in this game. There might be a character like Sonya who is a sort of femme fatale type of archetype, or perhaps a big hunk like Xander in there somewhere, but that, so long as they're fully realized characters, which they do seem to be appealing more to the classic fans with this, I don't know, I'm just very, very excited. I'm very happy with the direction that this seems to be taking. And that's where I think I'm going to call it. This trailer was so good. I wanted to make a quick addition to something I sort of thought about after the analysis. So since the church is a very sort of powerful force in this story, and that this one country seems to be representing the Middle East, and the crescent represents Islam typically, what I've begun to sort of think is that perhaps this country will have a different religion from the one that the main church supports. And if that's the case, the church might incite one of the other factions to perhaps attack this country. because, you know, burn the heretics or heathens or whatever. And then what I would guess almost is if these are the Celts, perhaps they will be motivated to take that action, and that's why the Celts seem to be the antagonizing sort of force in the game. And that this is sort of like a spectator country with Edelgard, and perhaps that will be sort of how to draw in the gray morality kind of thing, because perhaps all three of these countries know each other, like Edelgard, Claude, and Dimitri. They might all be friends, perhaps, but are forced to the war with each other in some way, shape, or form, and that could be how they create the great morality. Now, this could be me speaking out my ass, and it's completely wrong, but I just want to say it in case I'm right and I can call it later, because then I'll feel really smart. And I mean, again, I'm just excited, and I want to talk about this as much as possible because it's exciting. Oh, also, one thing I wanted to note: let's see when we get to one of the portraits of the characters. Storage. I want to see if we have a little larger portrait at some point. We might, yeah. So the artist who's doing these portraits, I think might be the same artist who did sort of Persona 5's like character art. Let me see like their portraits. So like if you compare like Anne to this to Edelgard, like the eyes seem very similar in some of the portraits. I did this before, but like just sort of like mainly the eyes and sort of the shape of the faces resemble each other quite a bit to me. So I'm thinking that it might be the same artist. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on all this. Let me know if you think I'm completely wrong in all these sort of speculation things that I'm doing. And I don't normally like speculation myself, but right now I'm just excited and my mind's racing because there's all these little things that seem to me to like echo an idea from history with all these sort of things that make me think of the Celts and the Middle Eastern sort of references. So let me hear your thoughts and maybe any other connections you might derive from the trailer.